Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sorry that some of you weren't here last week. Hopefully you listened to the recording and caught yourself up. I mentioned in introduction how he is Rabbi Emeritus at two congregations, one in Chicago and one here, Temple B'nai Yehuda, here in the city. I don't think I mentioned that he is also the rabbi in residence at St. Paul School of Theology, where I taught. And I told him, and I firmly believe this, that those students are incredibly privileged to be able to learn First Testament from a Jewish perspective instead of even a scholarly Christian perspective. So we are gifted as well this night, and please help me welcome back Rabbi Michael Zedek. Thank you.
So I heard you promised to teach 72 classes on the tape last week.
I did?
You said this is going to take 72.
Well, maybe it's because I guarantee you we'll not unpack everything that is possible. But she said, I promised to do 72 classes. I got to let people know what's right. But I lied. or the text sometimes distorts. Those of you who were here, forgive a brief recapitulation of some of the stuff. We talked about the notion that the text is multivalent. That has always been the way in which Jewish tradition is understood, the wondrous capacity to engage with these texts, that they are endlessly able to reveal insights about who we are and what we're supposed to be and how we're challenged to that growth. It is rare, if at all, that Jewish tradition would say, we're dealing with history as much as we're dealing with spiritual autobiography. That these are not just stories that may have, notice it may have, happened a long time ago. These are stories that happen in us and around us, and perhaps because of us, which would be all the more remarkable, would it not? Thus ended the sermon, now let's learn. I also mentioned that for Jewish tradition, every single text, every word exists on a minimum of 4 levels. Those of you remember the acronym PARDES, from which we get the English word paradise, the literal meaning, the hint or clue if you were to apply reason that we might not automatically apply to these texts because we think they're so special as opposed to any other book that we would look at and analyze. Drash, the ethical meaning, the lesson, the teaching that may apply not just to them way back then, but to us right here and now. And then Sod, the secret meaning, Pardes, secret meaning we'll have to talk about when you're older. Okay, I want to do a couple of quick items, and then we'll plunge into a deeper analysis of a text. I'm going to start with Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 4. Da, 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 da. Oh, no. And if anybody has a significantly different translation, you should say something, and I'll repeat it because I've been told I need to do that. While you who hold fast to the eternal your God are all alive today. Now, this presents itself as though it were Moses' farewell speech, right? Everybody, that's the setting of Deuteronomy. He goes on and on and on. In Jewish tradition, he goes on and on for 11 weeks, which, by the way, is quite remarkable since this guy began his career saying, I'm a man of few words. But there's something decisively wrong with that sentence, and we are going to be far from the first ones to ever notice it. While you who hold fast to the eternal your God are all alive today. What's wrong with that sentence? Anybody?
Well, it's written historically, so nobody's alive today.
Well, that's interesting, but you're being very factual oriented. Given if the presumption of the setting some 3,300 years ago, mas or menos, that how could they possibly be alive today?
Well, even if it was written in a historic time, they weren't there.
What is the setting of Deuteronomy? Anybody know? No? They're on the threshold of entering the promised land, right? 40 years. What has happened in that 40 years? They're all dead. So how in the world could it possibly say you were alive today. It gets worse. Open to chapter 29 of Deuteronomy. Ready? Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, you have seen all that the Lord did before your very eyes in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh and to all his courtiers and his whole country, the wondrous feats that you saw with your own eyes. My God, why not be redundant? With your own eyes, those prodigious signs and marvels. Yet to this day, the Lord has not given you a mind to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear. They weren't there. Yes, we are. And still we miss the wonders and miracles that are all around us, and now I would argue in us. That's the only way this text makes any sense, because the editors, the redactors, whatever you want to call them, knew what they were saying made no sense unless it's got a deeper level of meaning. And the deeper level of meaning can only be, we're talking existentially about ourselves. I mean, otherwise, why would we pay attention to this book? Because I wasn't there. You weren't there. In fact, it reminds me of one small item that I wasn't planning on, but no additional charge. As you may recall, the Israelites get out of Egypt, and they complain their way across the desert, right? They get to Mount Sinai, as I mentioned last week, and they build a golden calf, which would suggest these are the dumbest people to ever walk the face of the earth, or there's something more going on here. God is persuaded, according to the text by Moses, I'll give them another chance. What the heck? They're just pathetic failures, but aren't we all? And lo and behold, they send out 12 spies, right? And they come back, 10, they all report the same facts. 10 draw one conclusion, 2 draw a different conclusion. And that is the final straw. They will be informed, your carcasses will rot out here. They've been complaining that we should go back to Egypt. Now that they know they're not going to get to the promised land, why don't they go back? It's a remarkable moment in terms of the world that we all inhabit. We never get all the way. We set the stage for the next generation and the next, right? That's the most we could hope for. Because they've said it was better for us in Egypt. Now that they know, instead they put one foot in front of the other with an extraordinary dignity, knowing that the journey is the prize. Okay, those are some small little tidbits. One more at no additional charge. Judges chapter 6, verse 11. Chapter 6, verse 11 in the book of Judges. You ready? An angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinths at Ophrah. Now, a terebinth is a fancy schmancy term for an oak tree, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite. His son Gideon was then beating out wheat inside a winepress in order to keep it safe from the Midianites. You don't normally beat out wheat in a winepress unless you're trying to hide it. And hide it because the Midianites, which, by the way, is not a tribal designation, it seems to be a designation that describes vagabond marauders. Because some of you remember, wait a second, wasn't Jethro a Midianite? He lived in a vagabond situation, a nomad. Okay? At any rate, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, valiant warrior." Now here's what we know about Gideon when he gets this message about being a valiant warrior. He's a teenager. He has not seen any battle. Not only has he not seen any battle, he is hiding his stuff because he's fearful that stronger people are going to take it from him, right? Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord," by the way, if we were all fluent in Hebrew, you notice the word Lord, which we often don't translate that way anymore because of an awareness of the chauvinism of that language. The Hebrew word is Adonai, which is a substitute word for God's name. But Adonai can also mean sir. Like, is he talking to God or is he talking to a person? And the answer is yes. We'll look at that one in a more delicate fashion later. But the Lord is, well, let me go back to pick up the sentence. Turn the page, you stinker. There. Please, my Lord, small l, if the Lord, big L, is with us, why has all this befallen us? That's a reasonable question, isn't it? Where are all his wondrous deeds about which our fathers, we would say ancestors, told us, saying, truly, the Eternal brought us up out of Egypt. I just substituted Lord, Eternal for Lord. Now the Lord has abandoned us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. The Lord turned to him and said, now he's just asked for, where are all the signs and wonders, right? Go in strength of yours and deliver Israel from the Midianites. I herewith make you my messenger. He said, please, my Lord, how can I deliver Israel? I make you my messenger. And that is a message that echoes throughout the ages because, as you may recall, those of you who were here, the word messenger is the English translation of the Hebrew word malach, which got into English through the Greek word angelos as angel, and angelos being the Greek translation of the word messenger. Not a winged creature, but you and I are supposed to be messengers. And by the way, we are, whether we want to be or not. All of us have a message. The only question is it the right one? In fact, it reminds me of a story, as you'll probably figure most things do. This is a true story. It's from the 19th century of a rabbi with an exquisite musical name, the Chafetz Chaim. Isn't that great? Nobody names their kid that anymore. By the way, the Hebrew translates into one who desires or who is intoxicated with life. Anybody an attorney? My deepest sympathies, but you may be aware that in European legal systems, it is unusual to have a trial by jury. It is more common that there is a judge or 3 judges or a judge and 2 lay people who are the arbiters of courtroom behavior and the decisors of the verdict. So it would not be at all unusual in a courtroom case for an attorney to introduce the witness to the judge or judges with some background. So in this case, true story, a student of the Chafetz Chaim is accused of some crime, and the defense attorney summons the Chafetz Chaim as a character witness. And the attorney says to the judge, you know, Judge, what the Jews say about him? They say this man is so saintly that on one occasion he found, when he returned home, that a thief had broken in. And surprised by the return of the rabbi, the thief ran away. And the rabbi ran after him, shouting, I declare all of my property ownerless. I declare all of my property ownerless. It's a Talmudic category, which if it's ownerless, there's no crime. By the way, aside, those of you know Jean Valjean and Les Miserables and the Bishop, it's unbelievable parallel. You forgot this other candlestick, right? So the judge, hearing this story, peered down at the defense attorney and sneered, you don't really believe that now, do you? And the defense attorney said, I don't know, Judge, but this much I do know. They don't tell stories like that about you or me. And my point, they will tell stories about us. That's not the question. The question is, are those the stories we want to be told? And boy, that would be a good sermon someday. Yeah. All right. Now, one more, and then I promise we'll plunge into a specific textual problem. As I mentioned, the sages of my tradition had a love affair with the text. They didn't have television to distract them, didn't have a lot of books. This was their book, or books, a library, in fact. And they would search it high and low for all kinds of things. So, for example, the phrase, ve hafta, it means, and you shall love, appears 3 times in the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Now, why would somebody go to the trouble of figuring out how many times? They had the time. The first time it appears is, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the eternal your God. The second time it appears, You shall love the stranger as the native born, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The last time it appears is what Jesus noted as of some consequence. And you shall love the eternal your God with all your heart, with all your mind. That's the last time. So what do they make of that? You may claim you love God, but if you don't love neighbor and you're not loving stranger, you're a liar. We're often involved in fibbing, just ever so slightly. Okay, big time problem. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 20. Let me look at my notes. Come on. You know what? Let's go to the end of Deuteronomy, just the very end. And I don't need this because I have that clock up there. Da, 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 da. By the way, for those who are literalists, I may have mentioned, we're going to start with verse 10 in chapter 34. For those who think Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the question becomes, how did he write the part where he was dead? And the sages had a sense of humor. And they say, well, he wrote it with tears in his eyes. So, never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom, now tell me, what kind of translation somebody got next? Whom? The Lord knew face to face. Thank you very much. By the way, that sentence is probably enough for the moment. But, never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like unto Moses, right? So, rabbinic tradition, I mentioned with my tongue somewhere near my cheek last week that had I written the Hebrew Bible, it would have been much better. And my tongue was clearly near my cheek. And my point being that had I written it, no doubt I would have insisted that only my people have a relationship to God. But thank God I didn't write the Bible, because the Bible knows far better than I that you don't have to be part of a particular club in order to have a connection to the Holy One. The text demonstrates it over and over again. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And then the tradition says, in Israel perhaps, but among the nations of the world? Yeah. That's there's this wonderful tension in every serious religious tradition between universalism and particularism. And the answer for any serious religion, I believe, is yes. It's not either or, it's both and. So, Moses and God knew each other face to face, right? That's what it said.
Well, I thought that,
We're going there right now.
okay.
Exodus chapter 33. Verse 12. I'm almost there. You want to read it since you're the one who brought it up?
Sure.
Read as loudly as you can.
All right. The Lord said to Moses, "Go, leave this place, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt, and go to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I will give it. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the
You're doing pretty well on those ites.
To review, what is that? Yeah.
Is that 12?
No, it's not, but he was still doing such a nice job.
Well,
I want verse 12. Moses said,
You want verse 12?
yeah.
33, 12.
By the way, this is after the golden calf,
33, 12.
where it now seems like Moses is having a crisis of faith, I'm happy to point out.
All right. Moses said to the Lord, see, you have said to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me will sin with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now if I have found favor in your sight, show me your ways, so that I may know you and find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people.
Let me throw the kitchen sink into the argument. I want to know more.
Okay.
I don't know enough. I cannot be sure, confident sufficiently. Go ahead.
Okay. Consider too that this nation is your people. He said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest.
Okay, so Moses gets what he wants. Maybe. But he can't take yes for an answer. Keep going.
Then he said to him, if your presence will not go, do not carry us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people, unless you go with us? In this way we shall be distinct, and I your people from every people on the face of the earth.
Okay, so that was what verse?
That was
That was now in verse 17. I am now going to take over. And the Eternal One said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name. So that's, what's that, the third time he's gotten what he supposedly is asking for? He said, oh, let me behold your presence. By the way, the Hebrew word is kavodecha, and it's such a challenging and wondrous word. The Hebrew word literally means, let me behold, just keep listening after I say this, okay? Let me behold your liver. The word is related to the anatomical part of the body, liver, because what it literally means is, let me behold your essence, your heaviness, your presence, your allness. And why is it related to liver? Because the liver is the heaviest heaviest organ in the body. That's what we think is going on here. But it's usually, kavod is usually translated honor, glory, presence. I want to know more. And God said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name eternal, that is God's most intimate name, and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. Continuing, but you cannot see my face. That was your problem, right? For a human being may not see me, and I'm going to, instead of saying and live, survive. Which may mean, and I'm not pretending I know, that the fullest essence of deity is not possible for us to comprehend while we're in our containers. Talking about your bodies. Not mine, of course. Mine is perfection. And the Eternal said, see, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock. By the way, the rock is one of the names in Jewish tradition for God. And as my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you my hand until I pass by. Talk about metaphorical anthropomorphism here. Then I will take my hand away and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. Okay? So we got a problem here, because at the end of the story, knew God face to face, but we're told you can't possibly know that, can't have that experience. We're going to unravel this mystery in a Sherlock Holmesian-like fashion.
Did they think that after he died, he would see God?
He was still alive. But that's a very good try. I will give you that. But don't try anymore. I want you should turn to Genesis chapter 32. Verse 23. This is a strong candidate for one of the things that's absolutely amazing about what we have in the enormity of what survives from the ancient world to this day in this sacred literature. Because as you're not likely unaware, many traditions, we only have fragments of something that has survived. And from that, we weave a whole remarkable notion of, I'll give you an example. Heraclitus, does that name ring a bell? You know, 2 of his words have survived to this day. And from this, we call him one of the great philosophers of all time. By the way, the 2 words are Greek, panta all is fire. He's the philosopher of everything is change. You know, to put it in a funny way, the argument would be you can't step into the same river twice. No, you can't step into the same river. So, this is Jacob returning back, having fled from his brother 20 years earlier. He is about to have a moment. That same night, Jacob took up his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, my God, does he have family, and his 11 children, and crossed at the ford of the Jabbok. After taking them across the stream, he sent across all that he owned. So, pretend I'm drawing with some accuracy. Here's Haran, where he's coming from. Here's the Jabbok. Here's the sea, a little further. This is the Sea of Galilee. Don't hold me to it. The Jordan. He's here-ish. In every traditional literature, crossing a river is always a matter of significance. We have it in an easy fashion. Caesar crossing the Rubicon. There's no turning back. Now, what's somewhat stunning about good old Jacob, who's, what shall we say, not the most noble character you're going to find in your neighborhood, is that same night, he got up, he took his wives, his concubines, and his children, and he crossed at the ford of the Jabbok River. After taking the cross, he sent across all that he owned. Now, Jacob was left alone. What does that mean? One possibility. The family goes over, then he takes over his possessions, and he goes back. He's left alone, right? Now, I wouldn't be surprised about that, but what's very disappointing is he sends over his family, and then he sends over his possessions. As far as he knows, his intelligence has told him that his brother Esau is coming to meet him with 400 armed men. No small retinue in them good old days. The last time they had any dealings, his understanding was Esau meant him no goodwill, in fact, intended to murder him. So, I can imagine Jacob rationalizing, listen, they're not going to hurt the kids. They're not going to hurt the property. Maybe they'll just take a little. They're after me, so I'll keep myself safe. What a stinker. Jacob was left alone. That's very important. And a man wrestled with him until the rise of dawn. Now, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. He's left alone. And a man, by the way, it says an ish, not an angel, which is the prophet Joel is the one who tells us it was an angel. But remember, angel doesn't necessarily mean a celestial being. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the dawn. Help me understand how you can conflate those 2 things into sense. One option is he was wrestling with himself. Fair? But it gets more frighteningly complex. Because this is, again, I think you could unpack just about everything that the Hebrew Bible intends in this one section. When the man saw that, by the way, anybody got something else besides man there?
I have someone because I'm using this.
That's good. Someone? Okay. That's because it's silent. There's no pronoun present.
Yes.
Okay. When the man saw that he could not overcome, he struck Jacob's hip socket so that Jacob's hip socket was wrenched as the someone or man wrestled with him. In short, they're in a battle. The adversary, whatever that adversary is, can't gain advantage and puts on an illegal hold. Violates the wrestling rules of the world, whatever it's called, and Jacob, hip socket is wrenched. He's going to limp for the rest of his life, which is both intriguing and metaphorically true about every human being, it would seem to me. I don't know anybody who isn't wounded. Then he said, the he being that whatever, Let me go. Dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. This is such a remarkable comment. I unpack it in among other ways in the following fashion. I did not want this to happen, whatever that is, but I will not simply be stuck in why me. What can I do now? What is the possible blessing that I can derive from this event that I still do not wish to have with me, but am I only going to leave it there, or can I find some way to continue to be a force for living or for life or for blessing, despite the fact that it happened? A quick example, we were talking about dinner. We were talking at dinner. I was 18 when my father died. I didn't want him to die, obviously. But he set out to teach me what I consider the four most important lessons I know as an adult. Forgive me for this repetition. One, life is a very precious, very fragile gift. Obvious, right? Two, were I to die today, I want more. I am so crazy in love with life, I cannot hold it close enough. Three, were I to die today, and I mean this with every fiber that I can summon of integrity, it would be enough to say thank you. I want more, but if this is all I get, thank you. Lesson number 4, I'd rather have my father than have learned any of that. I can't have that, but ki im berachtani, the Hebrew, I will not let it go until I can find the blessing in it. And the blessing in it is what he continues to infuse in the person I hope to become someday. You know? As an aside, I was officiating for the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, at my old congregation in Chicago, and I gave a sermon on Yom Kippur evening, Kol Nidre, on mortality. And I started off with a reference to the comedian Stephen Wright. Yeah. Some of you know, he has the incredible deadpan delivery, right? So I gave as an example, and then the point that got the sermon started was, the sign said, breakfast anytime. So I asked for French toast during the Renaissance. But then what it really is, my ambition is to live forever. So far, so good. And by the way, I switched from that to an interview that Groucho Marx gave where he was asked, what would you like people to say about you 100 years from now? And I'd like him to say, it looks really good for someone his age. Back to the text. I will not let you go unless you bless me. The other said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. No more shall you be called Jacob, but Israel, said the other, for you have struggled with God and with human beings, and you have prevailed. I so wish, does anybody have a different translation?
This crazy Bible.
This crazy Bible? I don't know that edition.
Yeah, it's the inclusive one. Your name will no longer be Jacob, or heel grabber, but Israel, overcomer of God, because you have wrestled with both God and mortals, and you have prevailed.
Okay, so what your Bible's doing is trying to unpack the words. Yaakov means crooked. Yisrael is, one of the ways of interpreting it is the Hebrew word straight. Okay? But prevailed is absolutely wrong. I mean, it's stunning to me. You have prevailed, don't you? Well, you got my translation. Yeah. Ki sarita im Elohim ve'im anashim v'tucha. Ki, because sarita, you hear this, because that's the connotation of how you get the name Israel. Sarita im Elohim, with God, ve'im anashim, with people, v'tuchal, and it doesn't mean you prevailed. It means, because he never prevails. And you are competent, you are capable, you are able. That is what you're supposed to do, is wrestle with God and wrestle with others, and that is your core competency. In fact, Yisrael can mean what your text made straight with God, or There was a remarkable rabbi named Rav Kook. He was early 20th century, the first Ashkenazic, don't worry about what that means, chief rabbi of the then British Mandate of Palestine. And he was a pacifist during World War II, a very difficult position for a Jew to maintain. He did not like that our patronymic, that's a fancy schmancy word for the origin of a people's name, the people of Israel, right? That it was associated with wrestling, with conflict, with fighting. So he unpacked it in a beautiful and different way. Remember the assonance, Sarita Yisrael. You hear that? Yes, everybody hears the connotation, the onomatopoeic connection. He said, don't say ki Sarita, ki Yashir El, which means he will sing God. What is the lyric of our lives? Because we do give testimony to what is our ultimate values. Or as I may have shared with some of you, I'm very fond of a comment attributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson. I said attributed because no one can find where he actually wrote this, but it's been attributed to him, not unlike the St. Francis thing, so what the heck, it's this. The gods we worship write their names upon our faces. And be sure of it, we will worship something. Aside and breaking through. It's not God or no God, it's what is our God going to be. Be sure of it, we will worship something. It behooves us to be careful what we are worshiping. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming. Yashir El, he will sing God, the ultimate value. Now, where we're getting to our point to solve the mystery. Then Jacob asked, "Pray tell me now your name." But he said, "Why do you ask my name?" I mean, that's a very unusual name. Why do you ask my name? No. And then he took his leave of him. So there's the element of mystery. Fair? Jacob thereafter named the place Peniel. For I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. Go back to verse... you don't have to go back. I've seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. Because again, this tradition that you can't possibly have that happen, right? The sun shone on him as he was leaving Peniel, which is another variation of the same place. Peniel means face of God. And he was limping on account of his thigh. To this day, that is why the people of Israel do not eat the thigh muscle that is in the socket of the hip, because he struck Jacob's hip socket at the thigh muscle. Anybody ever teach English? Did I see a hand almost go up? Have anybody taught English? So you and I are going to know a word that I bet very few others will recall. Bathos. Yes? Familiar? So some of you remember the word bathysphere. It means to go deep or under. Bathos is something like the following. There was a terrible accident. 400 people suffered major injuries, 27 killed. I got a hangnail. That's bathos. I mean, you instead would go, well, I only got a hangnail, there was a terrible accident. That would be climactic as opposed to ridiculously dropping. So what I'm saying, here's this remarkable, incredible story of a claim that a man met God face to face. And what does it teach us? It teaches us that we don't eat sirloin steak. Do you recognize that kind of ridiculous? Yeah? Well, it's probably there to hide what's coming up next. You will turn now, please, to chapter 33, verse 4. If you remember Jacob sends three separate settings of gifts to try to pacify, maybe to find out what his brother's intent is. Esau, though, ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they burst into tears. Verse 8. Esau said, "What is all this camp that I came across yours?" And Jacob replied, "Yes, it is all meant to find favor in the sight of my Lord." Remember that word again. It's so challenging that it keeps on coming up over and over again. Esau said, "I have an abundance, my brother. Let what is yours be yours." Jacob said, "No, please. If I have truly found favor in your sight, Remember that phrase from our encounter with Moses? Favor in your sight? Take the offering of my hand, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have already shown me favor. Now, by the way, the Hebrew is even more remarkable. Ra'iti fanecha kirot penei Elohim v'tirtzeni. The equivalent of seeing your face is equal to seeing God's face. And you have welcomed me, you have accepted me, you have been granted me favor. Which is to say, from the Bible's perspective, as far as I can tell, there's no such thing as secular humanism. It's all sacred. The closest we're going to get to encountering the faces of God is in the encounter with each other. In fact, one thing, and then please. One of the things that's very curious about the Hebrew word for face is it is in the plural form, even though it's a singular word. Why would they do that? At minimum, it's because no one has a face. We all have faces. Go ahead.
I dare to suggest a secret meaning.
She dares to suggest a secret meaning.
I am an identical twin.
Ah,
So this whole story has a particular,
well, it's dealing with twins that were not identical. Yeah.
they're not, but it says one was holding the heel of the other, which implies they were identical, but they're not, because if they were born holding on to each other, they would have to have been born in the same amniotic sac and be identical by birth, which they're not by identity. So when my sister and I were growing up in church and heard that humans were created in the image of God, and we look at each other and we go, you're created in the image of God, I'm created in the image of God, which one of us is God?
Well, which one of you is God?
Which is what you're saying about God.
We're back to last week. We're created in the image of God. We are not God.
But one of you is
Yeah,
the image of
I'm paraphrasing Pascal. You know, nature has perfection in it, so that we know that it's created by God. Nature has imperfection, so we know we got work to do.
This whole thing to me is an identity struggle.
Well, let me put it this way. I think that's a good way of understanding it. And now, again, I remember my pretense that if I had written the Bible, it would have been better. Had I written this story, he used to be Yaakov, crooked. Now he's Yashar, straight. Except he isn't always and forever going to be Israel. He's going to be sometimes Jacob and sometimes Israel. Because isn't that true of all of us? Yeah. I mean, I can't help it. It's there. It is really, really there. But I find the notion that every human being is of infinite value so critical to the work I am never not done with, that I find these texts enlightening and important. And I don't know any other way to understand it than what we just unpacked, because again, for the tradition of which I am a part, this isn't earlier and this isn't later. It's all one gestalt trying to convey some critical ways in which we need to be in the world. You had a...
How would you apply that model, as a Jewish person, how would you apply that model to Hitler, for example?
As a Jewish person, how would I apply that model to Hitler? Yeah. Well, the first issue is, of course, the notion of evil in the world has always been the perplexing challenge of any theist. Fair?
Well,
Yeah. No, I'll try to get there, I promise. But it'll give me some time to think of a good answer. In fact, one of the fascinating things about Deuteronomy is Deuteronomy presents a Santa Claus theology. You know, if you're good, you get a present. If you're bad, you're going to get punished. Job is my judgment, probably the singularly most remarkable and important book in the Hebrew Bible. Not the least of the reasons being that, first of all, Job isn't Jewish. Second, or an Israelite, or whatever term you want to use. And second, it is an attack on the simple-minded notion of Deuteronomy. Because if you know the story, to unpack it for a moment, Begins with a prose beginning in which God is bragging to Satan. Satan doesn't mean the devil, it means the adversary. That there's nobody better in the whole world than Job. He's just fantastic. And Satan says, fantastic my tush. He's had everything going his way. Let's see how well he does with some adversity. And in the text, this monster portrait of God, he's in your power, only you can't touch him, right? I'm not making any of this up, those of you who know the book. And he is wiped out financially, and his children are killed. Job refuses to, in the words of the text, curse God and die, which would be a way of saying life is meaningless, right? Scene switches to heaven. God putting his fingers in his suspenders there. I told you he's such a fine, fine fella. And Satan says, bull, let me get him in his own flesh. We'll see what a fine fella he is. He's in your power, only you can't kill him. He is stricken with some loathsome disease, mistranslated as leprosy. Whatever it is, it's whatever disease requires people, AIDS at one time, to be shunned from the human enterprise. The text says he is left on a dung heap, which is a nice word for a pile of poo-poo, scratching his sores. His friends show up, 3 friends show up, and they don't say anything for 7 days, which is the last good thing that happens. The thing this remarkable work switches to poetry. P.S. It's the singularly most difficult poetry in the entire Hebrew Bible. I'm talking about the Hebrew now. I'm not talking about the English.
It's this claim of infinite worth, though, for everybody.
I'll get there. Give me a chance. The friends argue Job must have done something wrong, otherwise he would not be punished like this. And he argues, I haven't done anything wrong, and if I have, I don't deserve this. He's absolutely right, isn't he? And they say to him, aha, your very hubris condemns you. And he says, you're not friends and you're not comforters. Now, and what many scholars claim is an interpolation from a later generation, the whole argument is repeated with another guy who shows up. Job calls God to account. And quite clearly a candidate for some of the greatest literature ever written, chapter 38 of the book of Job, God appears. Doesn't respond to any of Job's questions, because how can we answer the question of God and evil? If I had an answer, it wouldn't be an adequate answer, and it would be an insufficient response. But Job is persuaded that even though he doesn't get an answer, life hurts, it bruises, it's tragic, but it's not the same thing as saying meaningless. I know that my Redeemer liveth, to use the old fancy schmancy Shakespearean stuff. So, what happens next? The scene, it switches back to prose. Job gets his health back, he gets his wealth back, and he gets new children to replace the old children. That's a dead giveaway that we're dealing with fraudulent beginning and end, because the heart of the matter is the poetry which nobody reads. But now to Hitler.
Let's take it a step further to Ecclesiastes. Vanity,
Yeah.
all this vanity.
Right.
In other words, how do we know that we aren't? I'll put this in a little bit different context, which may create a firestorm. How do we know that God created man or man created God?
Well, there's no question that human beings create the language about which we talk about the sacred. But for me, I have no problem with the notion that it's a human attempt to understand what a sacred perspective looks like. Because for me, the notion that when we're talking about God as person is far too complicated for me. Okay? The notion that there's holiness all around us and there's a sacred dimension in us makes sense to me, and that's sufficient for me to be confused. Now, I understand that that's not everybody's notion, but it is. In fact, I'm going to go in another direction. And then I promise to try the Hitler thing. One of the things that's extraordinary about the Hebrew Bible is all the names for God in it. Because what we call God is like saying, my name is not human being, my name is Michael. Your name is Michael too, but what the, so we've got, as some of you know, Elohim, Adonai, El Shaddai, El Elyon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rabbon Osh. It goes on and on and on. It's not unlike Islam, which has 99 names for God traditionally, because what are they trying to say? There's no name that's sufficient to capture all that we mean by the essence of existence. But God has a quote-unquote proper name, the story of Moses and the burning bush, which in and of itself is worth unpacking. Jesus, Bush is talking this book. And it's mistranslated into English as Jehovah. We have no idea how it was in fact pronounced because it's the name that's not pronounced. But the best closest guess is Yahweh. Okay? Now, English for the moment. As you may vaguely remember, Moses gets understood, I shall be what I shall be, I am what I am, etc., which is the first person. This is the third person form of the same word. Third person future tense of the verb to be is he, she, it will be, which is a very provocative notion when you're dealing with a primitive people. That's what God is. He, she, it will be, as in not yet full, or whatever the heck that might mean, but it gets worse. I know this is going to shock some of you. Biblical Hebrew is actually a relatively simple language. It only has about 10,000 roots, which if you could learn the roots, you can understand. The real hard part is learning how to mechanize the alphabet. At any rate, Biblical Hebrew also does not have a future tense. It has completed action and incompleted action. Now, English is a very elegant language. Biblical Hebrew is a very earlier language. What is completed action? In English, it's a sentence like he ran, right? What is incomplete action? He is running. Now, look at the exquisite skill of English. He is running means I am making an observation about what happened, what is happening, and what will continue to happen after I make the observation. Because otherwise I would say he ran, right? Everybody got that with clarity? Because it's as clear as I understand how to make it. So God's proper name is incompleted action. He was, is, will be. Or he is-ing. Boy, talk about a primitive people coming up with an unbelievably sophisticated concept. In short, there is no place where what I'm going to use it now, I'm going to use a more neutral term, where the sacred is not present. We may not be present and aware, but it is not, there is no place where it is not. Now, with regard to the image of God and Hitler, there's no question of mine that we can discolor the image. There's no question of mine that we can pervert the image. There's no question of mine that because human beings have free will, for sure, because even if we're all determined, we don't know how we're determined, so we act as if we're free, that we can use that free will to become Mother Teresa, Saint Mother Teresa, or Adolf Hitler. We do amazingly cruel things nonchalantly to each other, and we do amazing, remarkable things with deep intent and joy with each other. Which are we going to be? You know, from a sacred perspective, when a kid on the playground injures with deep, hurtful stuff another child, they are doing a terrible thing. When a Hitler murders millions, they are doing terrible things. They are discoloring the image of God. Now, why did Hitler do it?
Hitler would not say that, though.
Of course not.
You're not a member of our club.
No, worse than you're not a member of a club. You're not part of the human family. Because as I'm going to go in an additional direction.
Let the folks command shop.
Yeah. Let me go in this direction and see if this helps. Is there anybody besides Michael and I that knows the name Dr. Roy Eckert? You haven't heard that name in a long time, have you? Yeah. He was a Lutheran minister and a professor of religion at Lehigh University. He's among the first after World War II who said, Christians have no business trying to convert Jews. But I'm going to paraphrase his argument. It's exquisite. He said, I grew up learning that Christianity is superior to Judaism. For after all, Christianity is a matter of choice. Judaism is simply an accident of birth. Now, he's not right on that, but for the sake of his argument. You know. And then he says, Hitler came along and taught me a very powerful lesson. What was it about Israel of the flesh, that's his name for the Jewish people, that Hitler knew we were his mortal enemy? That if he were going to establish a 1,000-year Reich, he had to eliminate my people from the capacity to be. And he answers his own question with great integrity. He says, the Moses story lives in us. The message of freedom gets into the world because of us. And so, image of God or not, every single dictatorship, without exception, has persecuted Jews. Because we're dangerous. I'm not done. I'm not done. You're not. But then he goes on. This is among the reasons I admire him so much. Is if that is true of Israel of the flesh, would it not also be true of Israel of the spirit? That's his name for Christians. And he answers his own question with great integrity. Somewhere on the order of 5 million Christians died in the concentration camps for the courage of their beliefs. But then he goes on and he says, you can always stop being Israel of the spirit. You can't stop being Israel of the flesh. And now I would add, it is not possible for a Christian to imagine Jesus not going to the concentration camps to relieve the suffering there. But it doesn't matter whether he wanted to go or not. He was a Jew. He would have been sent. Now, what does all that mean? It means human beings have done horrific things to other human beings since the human story began. We started last week with Cain and Abel. Does that mean that I am therefore not an image of God? It means I have attacked human and God, because that's what we just saw. I wrestled. So the question becomes, it says clearly he wrestled with a man, right? And it says he met God face to face. So which is it? Did he wrestle with a man or did he wrestle with God? And the answer is yes. That's the only possible answer. This is the only one that makes any sense out of the text. Go ahead.
I'm struggling through
Yes, you are.
a book with the fetching title of Becoming Hitler.
Ah.
And the fellow who wrote this teaches in British University.
Uh-huh.
And has tried to get into the mindset of the NSDAP in the 1920s. And the chapter where he tries to explain Hitler's anti-Semitism, in my humble opinion, he fails. Because is it the Jews who are controlling the Bolsheviks, or is it the racial Jews, or is it the religious Jews?
I tell you what, next week I'm going to bring a comment by David Walpole, who was a prime minister of Great Britain more than 100 years ago. It will respond in a very definitive way to what you're concerned about. But my answer is very simple. And it's based exactly on what I said. If you think of history as anything approximating a science, because it's only approximating a science, you look for constants. And one of the constants is that every dictatorship persecutes Jews. It's not an accident. It's because we're too dangerous for those who would take away freedom. Now, if you want to read something else, read the book by Erich Fromm called Escape from Freedom. It points out the following. For most of human history, most people have not been free. And it's not because someone steals it. It's because most people don't want the responsibility of it. We're more than willing to give it up for certainty. And I point out politics on display. That is the authoritarian impulse that is being appealed to right now in America. Far too many people are accepting it. I don't know if anybody heard the interview on NPR this morning with Bob Woodward about the Trump tapes. I mean, my God. There is an impulse in people to deny the image of God, not only in the other, but sometimes in themselves. Because we're free to do that.
But here's the thing that
And this is the last thing, because it's almost 8 o'clock. Go ahead.
I struggle with.
Studied mathematics?
Something called operations research. I did statistics for 20 years. In the mathematical tradition, a proposition is either true or false.
Well, then that's not biblical.
And then in the 1930s, a German mathematician, a fellow traveler, Albert Einstein, and they have Kurt Gödel proved that in an axiomatic system with enough structure to do simple arithmetic, there are propositions which are true, that is to say, consistent with that system, that cannot be proven in a finite number of steps.
Yeah.
The proof of that
I got to stop you because we're almost done, and well, you can pick up there next week. I don't know where that's going in terms of what I'm talking about. Okay.
got to talk offline because I'll be in Italy next week.
Well, how wonderful for you, and wonderful for me too. But I guess the comment. You remind me of a quote that Albert Einstein suggested. If my theory of relativity is proven correct, the Germans will celebrate me as a German. The French will celebrate me as a citizen of the world. If it is proven incorrect, the French will not know who I am, and the Germans will call me a Jew. Thank you all. But till next week. And you have safe travels.